By the time they get a pitch deck from us, we have the story behind each ring, we have the initial concepts of a design for each ring, and ultimately they're looking at it and they can actually see it. And sometimes we'll even send a sample so they can then touch it and feel it. And so you're kind of presenting, this is what it would be like. It's going to be awesome. Do you want to finish it with us?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today I have joining me Michelle Luchese and John Ruggiero, and they are the co-founders of Manly Bands, which we're gonna dive deep into a case study all around licensing and customer acquisition and scale. So I won't give away the whole teaser yet, because first I want to ask you guys your Cubicle to CEO story, but really it's like a garage to CEO story, I believe. So anyways, Michelle and John, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And you know, it is very much a cubicle before the garage. Yeah. So we could say Cubicle to CEO, I suppose. So yeah, do you want to take that one?
Oh, take the garage story?
Yeah.
Sure. So when John and I were getting married, we were having such a time trying to find him a ring. He has these massive hands. Do you want to show? Yeah. And so we would go into the jeweler and they would fall all over me and, oh, do you want these diamonds? Do you want those diamonds? And, you know, John, they couldn't even size him. And when they did have rings for him, it was more of a rarity. They were like in the back of the store and there were like 4 of them and they were super boring looking. And John he wasn't excited about those. You know, he was like, I don't want to subscribe to what every guy has been doing for the last however many years. You know, why can't I have something exciting? And so after we did end up getting him a ring online, and it was a terrible experience as well. The customer service was awful. There was just no reverence in the whole process. And so after we got married, we had moved out of LA and we were kind of starting a new life and we're looking for jobs. And we thought, you know what if we started our own company and what if we solved a problem that we had with the care and reverence that we would want it solved with? And so that's what we set out to do.
I really love the use of the word reverence to describe like the experience you want to create for your customers. I think that's really, really unique. And I can see that in even just in browsing your website, like the care that you put into every ring and the experience, like you said, that you want to create for your customers, which, by the way, congratulations on now being the #1 marketplace for men's wedding jewelry. Huge accomplishment. So as of this recording, Manly Bands has, over 500,000 customers. And in today's case study, we're really going to be diving into the major licensing deal that they did with the Tolkien Estate. By the way, I'm just going to say this for our listeners, because when I was preparing for this interview, I myself have only watched, I believe, the first Hobbit movie. So I wasn't like a huge Lord of the Rings. I know, the horror. It's actually I feel ashamed to admit that, but I will be honest. It's actually queued up on our, to watch list. And my husband's been like egging me on to watch it. But I was doing research for this and, I was like, how do you pronounce this last name? And I searched it up and it actually is Tolkien, but he swore up and down. He was like, no, it's the Tolkien Estate. Everyone says Tolkien. And I was like, no, they're saying it wrong. So I just want to say, all of you Lord of the Ring fans out there who are hearing me say this and you're like, Ellen, you said it wrong. I'm actually saying it right. I just want to put it out there. Okay. Anyway, so you signed this major branding deal with the Tolkien Estate for creating a Lord of the Rings inspired wedding band collection. And you're actually one of only 2 licensed makers of the one ring, like outside of the film. So I think for context for our listeners, it would be helpful if you maybe first explained, like, how does a branding deal even work? Like, what does that actually mean?
Sure. So it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of contracts and lawyers and back and forth. But really how it works, like from a financial perspective for other brands, is you give a percentage to that other brand that you're licensing to use their IP. And so in our case, the One Ring as an example, we're giving Warner Brothers, who owns the Tolkien Estate's, IP there, we're giving them a percentage of each of those sales. And so, when you're going into wholesale, which we have been and are doing more of this year, like you have to think about that in terms of your pricing too. Okay, well, I can't discount these as much because I also have to pay the licensing fee. So they're just like little nuances like that, but it is powerful. It's really fun. It is a lot of work. And it is a lot of money for sure.
Yeah, definitely an investment, but for us, it's definitely paid off, being able to connect with fans and making sure that the Tolkien Estate signs off on stuff and they tell us that, they approve the designs that we're doing. They're very much part of the process when it comes to designing the rings. And it's just really neat and special to kind of be able to connect not only with the fans, but also where the content originated from.
Absolutely. And when you decided to take this kind of big bet on your business, did you bootstrap the initial licensing cost, or was this like you took out a loan to take this risk, hoping that it would pay off?
Yeah, we did bootstrap it.
Bootstrapped
We bootstrapped everything. So yeah, it's been a challenge. Putting every dollar that you make back in is really difficult, and finding those times where you can invest, with the dollars that you have is great.
Absolutely. And I know you said, or we already referenced, that there's only really two total, that because they're very selective, right, about who they partner with. But in your licensing agreement and your terms, do you actually get exclusivity within this category, or is it possible that they could license it to like a similar company?
It is possible. Yeah, we don't get exclusivity with them. We do have exclusivity with some of our other licenses, but not with Warner Brothers. Yeah, they're just too big.
That makes sense. So was this your first branding deal then with Tolkien?
No, so we started with not Warner Brothers. We started with Jack Daniels, and it was such a great experience with Jack Daniels. They're a smaller company, which you wouldn't think, you wouldn't think it knowing how global the brand is, but they really are just so authentic about how they make their whiskey. They char their own barrels. They're doing everything the right way. So it's beautiful to be a part of, a company, work with a company like that. So when we started that line, we really sat down and tried to figure out what made Jack Daniels special amongst all the whiskey makers of the world. What is special about Jack Daniels? We went into the history of Jack. His actual name was Jasper, and so we named we have a Jasper ring. We named one of the rings Lynchburg, which is the town where it started and still is. It's a dry town, which is kind of hilarious. So there's
ironic.
a whole lot of rich history. Yeah. So there's a whole lot of rich history. So it was really fun to dive into that and really get nerdy about it and say, okay, well, how can we make this particular ring special? What kind of material can we insert in this, ring that's supposed to be about the distiller? What makes sense? And so we used this Damascus steel in the distiller ring that we had, originally, to try and sort of show all the forging and all the craftsmanship that goes into that particular role within the company. So yeah, we've just had a blast doing that.
That is so cool. I want to actually circle back to that first branding deal then in a moment. But first, I kind of wanted to just get inside your heads and understand, knowing that, with Warner Brothers and the Tolkien Estate, that it's a notoriously difficult, not difficult to work with necessarily, but just difficult to land a licensing deal with them. Why did you choose specifically to go after this deal and to even create a Lord of the Rings collection?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it was just a natural fit. We were a ring company. We want to do stuff that's really unique and different to help us kind of stand out from other competition. And the Lord of the Rings, having the one ring is for me the pinnacle. Okay, we have a ring company, we have to have the one ring. And I'm a huge nerd myself, so of course it was it has to be Lord of the Rings. And so we really made an effort and a push to get the license going, and we're fortunate that they were willing to chat with us about it, and they really liked what we did and what we represent and our philosophy and values. And I think it ended up working out so well. And actually, I think we have a couple of samples here.
We
too.
do.
Oh, yes. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're not watching this on YouTube, maybe turn on YouTube and you'll be able to see these.
Yeah. So
can you see these in the camera? Kind of. They're tiny.
yeah. So you can kind of see here. So yeah, we have several designs, and it's so much fun. We even have one ring that's this is a size 25, which is much larger than even my hands, but they're beautiful. I mean, they really are, and each one represents the characters from the film, or from the story rather, and they're great. It's so great. We love to have the opportunity to do that. It really helps us stand out.
Yeah. And even though I know I'm not part of the lore, I think it's really cool that you present it on the map. Even I, being ignorant to this fandom, I still recognize that map. So it's, very iconic. I think you guys did a wonderful job just thinking holistically through how you bring, again, that experience alive for your customers. I would love to know too, how did you actually approach this to begin with? How did you get in contact with the right agent? Was this a cold pitch? How did you approach the pitch? How did you find this contact? I'm sure there's so many listeners thinking, oh, I have this dream partnership, but I would have no idea how to even get into their sphere of awareness.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can go at it. You can hire a licensing agency to help you if your brand's big enough. Usually they'll take you on. Or you can just, cold email them, and you can put together a beautiful, fantastic pitch that shows what you do and why you're special. That also wins these days. It really does. People get so bored of the same, hey, I'm not going to waste your time, but blah, 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 boring emails, but show them something gorgeous and beautiful, show what's special to you. And, a lot of times people will, rise up and say, oh, wow, this is really cool. Okay, fine. Let's do a 15-minute phone call, you know?
So how did you guys create that pattern interrupt, if you will, to catch their attention?
We did actually hire somebody in-house who had licensing experience. And so she went after a host of different licenses for us that year. And so we built a bunch up. It was nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. In the same way that you create an experience for your customers, do you try to, like, I know sometimes when people go out of the box with pitches, like you said, maybe they don't just send an email, maybe they send like some sort of experiential package. Do you guys do anything of that sort, or do you start just simple with the email contact and then kind of move from there?
Yeah, no, for sure. We actually try to go in best foot forward every time. And so we'll actually spend the time prior to reaching out, usually, to put together a whole pitch deck. And so we'll work with our products team and our creative team, and we have an amazing creative minds here that can put together these designs before we even reach out to them. So by the time they get a pitch deck from us, we have the story behind each ring, we have the initial concepts of a design for each ring, and ultimately they're looking at it and they can actually see it, you know, and sometimes we'll even send a sample so they can then touch it and feel it. And so, you know, you're kind of presenting, this is what it would be like, as opposed to, you know, hey, let's work together. We don't really know what we're going to do, but, you know, let's chat about it, which is less appealing than sending like a package that's like, look, this is like halfway done. It's going to be awesome. Do you want to finish it with us? And I feel like it's almost like a spec thing. You know, it's like, do the work, do the legwork, get it ready to go, show them what could be, and then sell them on that. And ultimately, you know, if you do a good job, like, why wouldn't they want to?
Exactly. I think that we often get kind of in our heads about, oh, well, you know, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe it isn't, you know, is going to work, whatever. I don't want to put the time into it. And then you just get in your own way. Whereas if you just spend the time and energy to put together something beautiful, take out of your brain what is gorgeous and amazing, put it on paper into a deck, and then, yeah, like you said, you have put your best foot forward. You're showing what you can do and what your company can do. And then how can they not pay attention?
Exactly.
And it's about, you know, also like standing out from other folks, because so many people will just send an email, you know, hey, I do this, we should work together. And they probably get so many emails like that. But if it's like the full package arrives and they can look at it and touch it and, you know, see what the ring's going to be like, and it's just a whole different way to stand out from everybody else. And that's really what it is. It's about cutting through that noise.
Yeah, the experiential thing you're mentioning too is something that we have tried a couple times too, with just different like influencers or celebrities, where we've, you know, put together a very specific package for them and sent it off. We were very early days when we were doing that, so I can't say that materialized into anything, but it was really fun to do.
Absolutely.
Oh, I bet. And I feel like every touch point like that is so memorable for the indies. Even if you can't directly correlate it to, you know, growth in the business, I think it builds upon that like brand equity and how people perceive you. So there's always, I think, value in that. And I obviously have very limited experience in licensing. And in fact, I've never done what you guys did in licensed from another existing brand, but actually the opposite, where I licensed my IP to maybe, you know, like a software brand or an education company or whatnot. But I can really relate, and I want to pull out for our listeners what John and Michelle, for those of you listening, just said. I think that is key, that you actually show up and you lead the conversation rather than just saying, hey, I want to collaborate. It's like, hey, I already have a fully fleshed out idea and this is what it looks like. And like you said, John, it's like you're already almost at the finish line. So it's like all you're looking for is their green light to finish that race. So why would they not at least consider it? Loved that takeaway. I wanted to make sure our listeners really caught hold of that. Once you actually got your foot in the door with, you know, with this, with the estate, how did that end up playing out? Like, what types of hoops maybe did you have to jump through in the actual negotiation process once they were interested?
Sure. So there's a lot of negotiating in terms of like what the process is, what the fee is. Bigger brands like Warner Brothers have their sort of very specific contract that you're walking into, and then you just mostly have to be comfortable with everything. But lots of times they will redline little things here and there. So if your process is a little different than what theirs is, my best advice would be read everything. You know, if you can't afford like having a counsel, like a lawyer in-house, certainly have someone that you can send it to, a family member, what have you, that is like really scraping through it and making sure that they understand. Because there are certain like clauses where if you're canceling the contract, there's like a buyout period and all kinds of other like random little bits of the contract that you just have to be very aware of. And so, yeah, just be very detailed about it. Another thing we do for our team is we've started to like detail, because we have so many licenses now, We've detailed all of the like sort of nuggets for each department that they need to know. So, hey, finance, this is how royalty reporting goes with this license. You know, hey, marketing, this is how you have to go through your approval process, because every license does have a very specific approval process. Everything that has their branding on has to be approved by them, which is totally fair. And they all have their own different systems that you have to go through in which to do that, which is a lot of legwork to do all those little things like, ooh, we want to put this ad out. Ooh, we want to do an email. We want to do an SMS. We want to, you know, if you're putting a picture in it, you know, we want to do a billboard, all these things, a commercial, all of it has to have, you know, approvals from all these companies too. So yeah, it's a process of definitely all the paperwork and going through with the lawyers, making sure that your team is very clear on what needs to happen, going back to the designs with the decision makers over there and saying, hey, what do you want to tweak? Because there's usually a little bit of tweaking, you know, back and forth on things. And then for us, we practically make these samples in our manufacturing space, and then we have to send them to the Tolkien Estate, and then we also send them to Warner Brothers too, so they both have to approve. And then once we get the green light, then we can start, you know, putting everything on site and getting it going. So it's a bit of a process.
For sure. And then one other thing to add to that too is, you know, these are real companies with real products, and their goal is to make money.
Yes.
And they know that what they're selling is super valuable, especially to the fans who appreciate it. And so oftentimes, well, every time I think with our licenses, we have what they call a minimum order quantity, or an MOQ that we have to hit. So it's not like we can just let's just make rings and we'll sell them and give them 10%. Like, no, we're contractually committed to selling X amount of dollars of revenue for them. And if we don't hit that through ring sales, we still owe them that revenue. And so, you know, it really motivates us, of course, to sell as many of them as we can to hit those order quantities. But we have to plan ahead, because if we don't think we can hit that, well, we still have to come up with the funds for it. So it's that's part of the negotiations, but that's definitely a big part of it, and it makes it kind of hard if you're a smaller company, because, you know, that could really be a problem if you can't hit those minimum order quantities.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially just even managing the cash flow of it, because it's so delayed, right? You're putting all this capital up front, and then you're waiting for those purchases to come in, and then, you know, who knows how long that takes to actually cycle. Have you ever run into a situation where you actually were not able to hit the minimum quota? And if so, how did you end up tackling that challenge?
Which license was that?
It was MLB.
Oh,
yeah.
Baseball.
Yeah. So we do not have a baseball audience, it turns out. Yeah. Or it's possible that for whatever reason, the rings that we designed, you know, that time just didn't
resonate,
hit.
yeah.
I would love to redo that. I think we could do it differently. Yes. So that was a bummer, because we could see it coming. We could see that we weren't going to make that, you know, it's called a minimum guarantee. We could see that we weren't going to make that. And then, yeah, we just had to pay it. You know, there's a schedule. There's a very specific schedule in each contract of when you have to pay the different guarantees by. So yeah, we just
had to pay it.
Yeah, had to pay it, had to come up with it.
Part of the agreement. And
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously before signing anything like that, make sure you know what you're committing to, and, you know, make sure you can do it.
Yeah, and it's an investment. So, you know, some people, I've heard some brands, you know, they'll take their minimum guarantees and they'll put them in like an escrow account just to be safe. And that's the super safe thing to do. That's beautiful. But if you can't do that, if you're bootstrapping like we were just like, okay, we're just going to make sure that we budget so that we have that cash, you know, because we could see it coming. So we'll have that cash when we're ready.
So in that case, I mean, obviously you had to pay the minimum guarantee, the gap, and make up the difference. But meanwhile, you still have all of this inventory, right, of the MLB greens that hadn't sold. So did you test any sort of creative campaigns to sell through the remainder of the inventory, or did you kind of just call it a loss and say, hey, it's just not for our people?
Well, you know, fortunately, we manufacture in-house. So while we did have some stock on hand, we were able to go through that without a problem. And most of the orders that came through, we were just making them as the orders were coming through. So towards the end of the agreement, there really weren't that many outstanding inventory items, because we were kind of making them on demand. So we did kind of get lucky with that. But we've had other situations where that wasn't the case, and we did have inventory, and we'd put it on clearance and try to move through it, and like you do.
Yeah, and there's in the contract, there's like a sell-off period. I think most licenses have like 60 to 90 days where you can do that. You can put it on clearance. You can try to sell through it. Like you said, they like to make money, so they're still happy to get their fee on whatever you can make on it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a give and take. We've been really lucky with almost all the licenses. We just learned sometimes that, you know, one or two here or there don't perform as well as others. But for the most part, it's been a wonderful experience. And the partners that we're working with now, we love working with, and they like working with us.
Yeah, it seems like a very collaborative process. And to your point, John, like, you don't know, right, what's going to really resonate and hit with your audience until you put it out there. So it's worth the test to find, you know, the ones like the Lord of the Rings that just really, really resonate with your people. Going back to that licensing deal, you mentioned some of the the things to look out for in the contracts and whatnot, including the minimum guarantee. Was there any point in the negotiation process that felt particularly tough, like maybe something that they weren't willing to concede on that you just had to accept, or maybe something that the opposite, where you actually chose to stay firm and you're like, it has to be this or else we're not doing this at all?
It usually comes down to that minimum guarantee.
Yeah, that's a big conversation point, always.
Because sometimes these are large companies, and we're a good mid-sized company. We're not small, but I think you still have to consider that. And it's like, well, if it's a new license, we always survey our customers ahead of time before going out and getting licenses, because we want to make sure that the people we're marketing to do have an affinity for these licenses. So we knew that our audience, loved Lord of the Rings before we even approached them. But that doesn't necessarily mean those are going to turn into sales, because we're surveying people who a year before we even went down that path. So they obviously already had their wedding rings. So it wasn't going to be that group of people we surveyed necessarily coming back to purchase from us. So it's all averages and things like that. But I would say the minimum guarantee is still a risk. And so you always try to get that as low as you can from the brand side, because you want to have that safety net. But oftentimes with large companies, they're not willing to budge. And, you can't blame them either, because, they're trying to get quality partners that are going to be able to sell so that everybody makes money. And thankfully, we're of the size now where we have a great track record, and brands are very willing to, or licensors are very willing to work with us. So that's good. But definitely when we started, there was some back and forth, and as there should be and will always be. But it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, and there continues to be back and forth as you continue the partnership too, because your licenses will renew at a certain point if they're going well. You want to go through a renewal period. And so we're going through a couple of those right now. So there's negotiations back and forth about those minimum guarantees, also about like access to where we can sell, so for instance, we're working with Warner Brothers to be able to sell the One Ring like internationally now,
cool.
Which is fantastic. Yeah. And in our wholesale stores. And so we'll have that, as soon as January, which is fantastic. But yeah, you still have to go through all of those little bits, because initially a license is not going to say, most times, sure, sell wherever you want. Everything's great. No problem. They have to be restrictive on their side for their company as well and do their company right. And so you'll usually get a little pocket, like, e-commerce, United States. That's what you can have the first year, and then prove it out. And then you can have a little bit more. You get international e-commerce. Then maybe the next year you get wholesale, retail, what have you. So like you have to be part of this partnership and actively expanding it the whole time as well.
Right. I wanted to expand on the point you guys made about how, you try to offset risk a little bit by doing that market research ahead of time to gauge interest in your existing customer base. But like you guys said, the people who are shopping actively for wedding rings are probably not the people who already bought wedding rings. So I just wanted to ask for our listeners who may also have product-based businesses and are trying to forecast sales projections, right? To be able to negotiate accurately those minimum guarantees or whatnot, or even just purchasing inventory, let's say. How do you calculate? Is there some sort of framework or formula that you follow to kind of estimate, can we actually realistically hit that minimum guarantee? And what does that number or analytic process look like?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a process. A lot of statistics and calculations and averages and things like that. But the easiest, it's not an easy process, but probably the best way to approach it and the way we approach it is being super conservative. So you never want to assume, if I get this license, I'm going to make an extra $4 million next year, and that's going to equal X amount of orders, and it's going to be awesome, and let me go tell them that. You don't want to do that, because if you don't hit it, well, then you have that minimum guarantee you got to pay for. So we try to be realistic, but lean on the conservative side, because if you come up selling more than you estimate, that's good for everybody, right? So they'll never be upset about that, but they might get a little bummed out if you don't hit it, and that could put your license at risk when renewal time comes up. And so we always try to estimate, okay, if it has modest growth, based on the surveys we've done with our existing customers and from traffic on our website and other ways, what could we see? Are people really excited about this? If we send out an email, to 100,000 people, like how many clicks did it get? Like, is it really, does it seem like there's interest in this? And so you kind of take all that data and you put it together and you say, well, if, maybe this will represent, 3% of our overall revenue or sales, and that equals X amount of orders. And if that's the base, then is it going to grow over the year? And then you got to kind of think, okay, well, what's our overall business going to do? Is it going to grow next year? Is it going to, stay flat? And you kind of apply all these calculations and you kind of come up with some averages and worst case, best case type things. And, like any other way of forecasting, you just have to be careful. Nothing should be too rosy, because then it gets really stressful if you're not hitting your numbers. So yeah, realistic, then maybe a little bit conservative of that, which puts you in a safer place. And, for some people doing the exercise, they may think, well, you know what, maybe it's not worth it to do it right now. Maybe I need to grow my business a little more before I go down this road, just so I don't put myself at risk. And on the other end of that spectrum, it's like, hey, we're doing really great. This could really help, boost us into the next level of where we need to be, and we should do it. So there's a cost-benefit analysis that needs to happen, and the biggest advice I would give for that is it's super important to survey the market that you're in. So obviously your customers, your traffic, like we do, we're like religious about surveys and things like that. We always want to understand our customers and what they're looking for, but also understand your competition too. I mean, if there's a bunch of competitors that all have the same license, then your license may not have the impact that you're hoping for. So there's a lot to consider for sure. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, a lot of factors involved for sure.
It is. Yeah, I know. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yes. Well, and I would add too that I think it's really important where that license that you're going after sits in the market too. So like one of the reasons we went after Jack Daniel's as an example is Jack is such an American company. You've got all these other like Jameson, what have you, like as a whiskey drinker, like I know a lot of different kinds of whiskey, but Jack Daniel's has that true American heritage that we all know and love, and our customer is very patriotic. We know that about our customer. So you also have to figure out like, where is your audience and what kind of brand in the space of, in this, particular example, whiskey, what whiskey company, or sorry, is it bourbon? Is it whiskey? It's whiskey. It's whiskey.
No, you had it right. Yeah.
I should know this. But yeah, which brand would they resonate with? It's important to know that. And then also to know how that brand is doing in the market too, because, unfortunately in cancel culture, we've seen some brands, kind of like take a hit with some stuff that's gone down. And so you want to make sure like, okay, well, maybe I want to be in this particular space over here, but I have to avoid that company for the moment. Do I just wait for everything to recover, or do I choose another, license in that space that might make sense for my brand?
Yeah, a lot of market research is necessary, I'd say.
Yeah,
that's a great point, Michelle, about the association of other brands' reputations or fluctuations in reputation and how that impacts the way that your customer, buys from you even. So I love that you brought that up. These signals that you guys are looking for, like how many clicks did this email get, or, what's the traffic on a certain web page? I know, like you said, there's too many factors to boil it down to like one simple equation. But if you were to just make like a kind of off the cuff general estimation of how many orders do we think we could realistically hit for something, do you utilize any sort of metric like a percentage of your overall customer base? Like, okay, we think 2% of our customer base could possibly buy this, and that kind of is like a starting place maybe for the number range? Or do you base it on like a different metric, like maybe 5% of total web page views for a similar type of product? Like which, I guess, factor kind of weighs the most heavily on how you're calculating that?
Yeah, sure. So it's still an analysis that needs to be run. It's tough to boil it down, but I would say take your website's conversion rate and have that to the side. And then, run some campaigns through email and through maybe some Facebook ads or Google ads, and just have like a coming soon page and, for that particular license. And then just run that for maybe a couple of weeks to a month. Don't spend a ton of money on it, but let's see, what's that click-through rate for those ads? What's the click-through rate for the email? And then take all that total traffic that goes to that landing page that talks about it, and really take a look at it. And then I guess the easiest way to get that baseline is to say all that traffic and then multiply that by your conversion rate. And that'll give you a really bare bones, conservative, most likely estimate, and say, okay, well, if we sent 100,000 people to this and we have a 1% conversion rate, then okay, we know that, maybe 1,000 people will buy it, and that will equal, X amount of revenue, and kind of give you that baseline. I would still then err on the side of caution though, and deduct another, maybe 50% off of that, just to be safe. But that's a good way to do baseline, and for us, you find pretty quickly, once you get into it, you find pretty quickly, if you're spending money on ads and really promoting it, that you can kind of see, okay, what percentage of our orders are these licenses going to represent? And so now that it's helpful now that we have that data, which you don't get when you're just starting out, but we kind of can understand, okay, well, Lord of the Rings does X amount of our overall order, Jack Daniel's does X, will this next launch that we're doing be a Jack Daniel's Lord of the Rings, or will it be a MLB or Game of Thrones type level? And we just try to find like licenses and to get an idea. It's super important and crucial not to find yourself in a tough situation there, and doing these customer analytics and surveys and post-purchase surveys super important.
We did like an unintentional test with Jack Daniels, and I don't know if this would help listeners, but we had a line of whiskey barrel rings that were not specific to Jack Daniels, but they were just, a test to see how they did, and they did really well. And so that was part of that research, in particular with Jack Daniels. Like, would people like this? Is this going to sell? Is this material going to sell? And then to us, part of those metrics I would assume that John was doing at the time, were based on the sales of just the whiskey barrel in general. And then of course, when you add the brand to it, then we got a bump, which we could presume that we would get a bump on something like that because we had tested that material already. With Lord of the Rings, we couldn't do something like that because we were really specific about these rings. Like there's bowstring in the Legolas,
Cool.
So, we're like really, really specific about each character and what made them special. The Sauron kind of like it glows, and Gimli has his like crown in it, so that's really hard to test. But for something that has a material aspect, in our case, it was easy to give that a shot online, just unlicensed first.
And, just to add to another metric that we looked at, I'm just remembering, was we look at Google Trends to kind of see, okay, are people searching for this product? Like, if I sell a widget, are people typing in Lord of the Rings widget or, rings in our case, but like, t-shirts, Lord of the Rings t-shirts, like, is there an organic audience available already, or is this like a whole new concept no one's ever thought of and they're not going to be searching for it? Like, that's a greater risk because there aren't necessarily people looking for it. And so we looked at data like that, and also SEO, checking out those keywords, those same keywords. Lord of the Rings wedding band was a big one for us. Does it have volume? Are people looking for it? Because you don't want to sell a product that there's no demand for, because that won't work. And so it's important to look at that data as well.
That's such an excellent point in marketing nerd speak. Basically, like, are you selling a product that people already have problem awareness around, or are you having to create the problem for them, right? And so that's a very wise, I think, point of discernment in the research process. I'm curious, in all of your like pre-market research and just getting, again, indicators or survey interest, have you ever tested anything? Like, the campaign that kind of popped into mind is like when Tesla announced their Cybertruck and they were like, okay, you can put down $100 deposit, right? I mean, very minimal compared to the actual cost of the car, but they wanted like some skin in the game, right? From their customers to see, are we really gonna, do this? And so have you ever done anything similar where you maybe didn't make someone pre-order the actual cost of the ring, but like put in some amount of monetary investment other than just checking a box that's like, yeah, I'm interested if you ever carried this product?
I remember we did a email that went out pre-launch of these rings, but it was like a week beforehand just to tease people. But there was a little sense of us then looking at the research of how many people clicked on this, what was their interest, all of that stuff. So that's the closest I think we've ever gotten that I can think of. You?
Yeah, no, we've never done a monetary kind of like put X amount of dollars down, primarily because we want to get that conversion the day they visit as much as possible. I mean, there's certainly a window for us, but obviously if you can get them to convert sooner, that's better. And we'd rather have somebody come in and buy a ring that day than necessarily put down a small percentage for a ring they may or may not come back and purchase later. So I think just tactically, just for us, that doesn't make sense, but I could totally see for something that was like, and a lot of companies do this, like for much more expensive items that are going to have a much longer lead time, like a few months or a year even, like the Cybertruck, or, I've seen like just other types of technology, kind of like a Kickstarter, where it's going to be 6 months or something. Like, that is good to do that, to gauge that commitment for sure. And you can kind of, figure out your customer by that. If they have skin in their game, that's really great data. But for us, that didn't really make sense.
Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from with that. To get into some of the more detailed numbers, you guys launched this Lord of the Rings collection in October 2022. It's now one of your best-selling ones. So for our listeners, a little context here, the average price is $495. You saw a $1 million increase in sales from 2022 to 2023. You're actually on track to exceed that in 2024. So congratulations. And then you were able to add 7,000 customers and actually almost 8,000 total rings sold through this collection. I'd love to know, when you debut these, very fan specific collections, do you see a high reorder rate from existing customers who already have a wedding band, but maybe they're like, oh, I just want to add, something cool to my collection I can rotate out? Or do you see the vast majority of the sales come from new customers?
Yeah, we have seen some reorders in this line for sure. Yeah. There's certain lines that we see reorders from. So this is one of them. Our DC Comics line is another. Our Military Heritage line is a third. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But generally we're selling wedding rings, and so generally guys have the expression of I only get one wedding ring, which isn't fair because women get upgrades all the time, so that's something we're pushing against and trying to introduce into the market for guys to have that permission to have more than one wedding ring.
Yes.
But yeah, we've seen guys wear them as fashion rings. We've seen them just say, hey, I like to switch my rings out. John, you're switching your ring out like every day, but you also have access to like 500
right.
Fair advantage. Yeah.
I just go out to the shop and be like, what do I want to wear today? Yeah. But I think, to Michelle's point, we are trying to kind of help guys. Sure, it's totally self-serving, but we are trying to get guys to consider their rings kind of like they consider their watches, right? So it's like...
you were going to say wives.
No. That would possibly get repeat purchases. No.
Not a bad
We're not
strategy.
trying to get people to divorce. No, that's horrible. Although it's a good idea. Maybe next year.
Good marketing idea.
No.
We'll table that one.
No. But there's two things. There's the idea of, hey, it's date night. I want to wear one ring. Maybe it's the original one or a really nice one. I'm at the gym. A silicone ring makes sense. I don't want to ding up my nice ring, picking up weights or something. I'm at work. Maybe I don't want the nicest ring I have, but I don't want the silicone ring, but I want something decent. So there's that kind of concept. But for Lord of the Rings, for Jack Daniels, for the military heritage, for our licensed collections, and some of the more unique ones like the military one, they're almost like collectibles. I mean, you're not going to find them anywhere else. And they're made with the supervision and blessing from these license holders. And, a lot of care and time goes into them. And so a lot of guys, they do want a kind of a collection. The military one in particular is probably the best example of that, where we have rings from all the different world wars and just really interesting materials like B-29 bomber and tank and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I have a piece of the tank right here. It's really heavy.
Very light.
Very heavy. But it's stuff like this it's interesting. It's a collectible. And so we're able to, package that in such a way that folks, they want more than one. So definitely a small percentage of sales come from rebuys, but we're definitely trying to make it happen more.
I'm really fascinated by this. It's almost like a study of human behavior and not necessarily creating a new category per se, but creating, like you said, new consumption behavior around an existing category. Actually, when you guys were talking about, the rings being like collectibles or similar to how guys switch out, watches to match their outfits, it kind of brought to mind the analogy of how like women collect designer purses, and some to wear, some just to literally look at and just have as part of your collection. And even like the military heritage rings, I was like, like normally it would be probably odd for anyone other than your spouse to buy you a wedding band of any sort, but I could almost see that type of ring. Like I could see someone using that as a gift occasion, even if they're not necessarily like married to you, right? It could be just like a congratulatory gift or a celebration gift or whatever you want to call it. So very interesting. You guys are changing the consumer behavior around this category, which I think is very impressive. Speaking of consumer behavior, I've always been curious with ring purchase in specific, since, with women, oftentimes, you're in, like a heterosexual, marriage, it's a man buying the ring. And so with men buying rings, do you find that the majority of your customers are men purchasing rings for themselves, or is it actually their wives and women who are, driving the majority of these purchase decisions?
Yeah, so when we first started, it was about 70-30 women, which was so fun. And, when we got married, we didn't know anything about, I guess there's technically a tradition where the woman is supposed to buy the guy a ring. Makes sense because he's bought her a ring in that hetero relationship.
I wish I knew about that.
Right?
I feel like you could have saved our money.
Maybe not, there wasn't anything available. But yeah, so as we've gotten bigger, we've noticed a little bit more equal of a split. We're probably like 60-40 now, would you say? Still women?
Almost maybe 50-50
It's
even.
almost 50-50,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
What do you think has changed the behavior around that? Or do you think it's maybe just unique to your consumer base and not necessarily the category at large?
Yeah, I think what Michelle said, this newer tradition, I guess it's a newer tradition because we didn't hear about it until after we got married. So
We know everything.
yeah, well, obviously. But I'll just call it a newer tradition. And so, there's that. But also, guys, we don't wear jewelry, and so many of our guys were whoever's purchasing it, they don't know their size. And so a very large percent of our orders actually do size exchanges. So, people will order it and then they have to send it back. And, we do it all for free and whatnot and make it easy. But it's definitely it's like 25% of the orders. And so, sizing is an issue. But I think that really is just representative, a symptom of the overall issue is that, guys don't really wear jewelry until they get married, the majority of guys. And so I think, I certainly didn't, no one I know did. So I think that's probably why you also maybe see the other side of the equation that's more interested in the jewelry, whoever that is, they want to go buy it. It's exciting. So they may say, hey, I picked out these 5 designs. I thought you might like them. What do you think? And then you'll get the guy to come in and be like, yeah, I like that one. And then they'll buy it for him. And so I think that's kind of what runs it a little bit. Guys maybe don't necessarily like to peruse jewelry sites. So I think that's why there's that split.
Yeah, I mean, we very much think that the spouse of whatever sort is like driving the purchase in a lot of cases, because there's also, being a woman who's gotten married and planned the wedding and done all those things, there's a commonality between all of us where there's a checklist, and the things have to be checked up. They all have to get done. And for whatever reason, the men's ring is always last on the checklist. Maybe like just above groomsmen gifts.
An afterthought, right?
If you're doing that.
Yeah.
Such an afterthought. So that was part of us making this whole process more reverent, but it's important to get it done. And so that part of the equation is like, hey, I'm working on this list and this is still on the list. Like, we got to get this done. So I think that's why that's part of the conversation. And one thing that John did in ads at one point in the beginning is he was talking to, the woman in the hetero relationship, just saying like, hey, is he still dragging his feet on getting your ring? And, so whatever your audience is, who is the purchaser of that, equation? Is it the person the user is purchasing? Is it a gift? You have to think about all of that. Who is this purchaser? Are they purchasing for themselves or someone else?
Yeah. I mean, as a fairly recent newlywed, we got married last summer of 23. I can totally relate to everything you just said. The ring for Dustin, my husband, unfortunately, was a little bit of an afterthought. I wish we had known about Manly Vans, of course, at that time. We didn't. But yeah, it all makes sense exactly what you're saying around, just the way that your product really fits into like decades long of traditions and processes, and how changing that behavior really, it does take time, and it does take, kind of positioning it maybe in a different way. To kind of finish up our conversation and wrap up this case study, if we zoom out and we're just looking at your entire business as a whole, you guys seem like very creative marketers, very outside of the box thinkers. So I would just love to know, like, what is your primary strategy for acquiring customers? And tangential to that, like, maybe what has been your favorite recent campaign that just did really well, was really fun and creative, that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, the best way that we connect with our customers is by telling a story. And I think that's the case for any marketing, really. The best marketing tells a story. And so, when we started the business, Michelle did an amazing job naming the rings and coming up with descriptions for them. And, it was almost like a little story for each ring. And so that really resonated so well. It was brilliant. And I think, we've carried that through into our marketing. And so, we always say we want every ring to have a story, just like your love story has a story. And so it's like, how do we connect that story to the person looking at the ring? And so we've always focused on having creative that, talks about the history of our rings and our materials, and, our licenses all have a story. Jack Daniels has his story, and of course, Lord of the Rings is a story. And I think it's just kind of connecting with that and having a deeper connection than just, hey, come buy my widget, and sure, always talk about features and benefits and things like that. But to have an emotional connection, I think, is the best kind. And if you can really sell people on the meaning of what they're buying and the feeling of what they're buying, I think it'll be a much better sale. And honestly, it's a better experience for everybody. They aren't just buying something to check a box necessarily. They're buying something that means something to them. And I think that's how you really stand apart from your competition, and you can really have a meaningful relationship with your customer, which is super important. And then in terms of the best campaign or our favorite campaign.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We just launched one just recently. I
know what you're talking about.
I haven't seen the numbers yet, but it's something we're all super proud of, and the whole creative team worked tirelessly to get this out the door. But it's a campaign for our military heritage collection, and it starts off with a young service member who's coming back to his grandfather's cabin to kind of clean it up. His grandfather had passed on, and he's putting his stuff together, and he's realizing the importance of that ring and what his grandfather's ring was there, and where it came from and what he did and how it represents his patriotism to his country and the type of man that he was, and everything about it was wrapped up. The ring was the symbol, and the materials in it. It was so much more than just a commitment to his relationship, which is super important, but it was also a commitment to the type of man he was and the country he served and his passion, and it was just super moving. And the team did such a fantastic job. So for me, it's stuff like that can really connect the story to the product and then ultimately to the customer that really makes a difference.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, if you guys have the link to that specific piece of creative or that video campaign, I'll have to get it from you after this interview, and we'd love to post it in the show notes for our viewers to go see and kind of see it in action, if you will. I love that. And one last note, you actually reminded me as you were mentioning Jack Daniels again, I had said at the beginning I had a second follow-up question and it just eluded me. But anyways, I remember now what I was going to ask you there. With these licensing partnerships with Jack Daniels, with Lord of the Rings, and all of the other ones, do the partners play any sort of role in helping to promote the products when they go live, or are they fully removed from that piece of cross promotion with their own audiences?
Yeah, so that's kind of a case by case basis. Some of them are willing to do a little posting, a little bit here and there. I would say the majority of them would say that you're on your own, and really until you prove yourself. And then once you prove yourself, then usually they're willing to do something. But they're also spending money on their side and having their marketing campaigns. And it's amazing to see large companies and large brands have these like 3-year marketing calendars. I'm so jealous of it.
We're just living day to day here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to make it work. I mean, they have to fit everything into their budgets and everything. So if you're asking them to do something, I would, go on the side of it not being something that costs anything to them.
Okay. So leveraging their existing channels, maybe owned assets, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, really, the
audience,
marketing they're doing is by growing their brand. And that's why we want to work with them. So they're focused on getting their name out there and, having these amazing brands. And so that's kind of how they're helping you right there, right? And,
for sure.
Yeah. What Michelle said, absolutely. Like, they don't necessarily, a lot of these big organizations, they don't have time to necessarily send out an email or put something on their website. So I wouldn't expect that. But occasionally, you just have to ask.
Yeah, and in the asking, like recently we launched Jeep last March, and that's been a fun license, and they were so welcoming to us at their Easter Jeep Safari, so we got to have a table there and get to introduce people to the product that was brand new, and it was fun to meet the audience. So sometimes you can get invited to things like that where you get to meet the audience of that brand, which I would say please do, like always do. It's so educational because we learned a lot about the demographic of the Jeep person, which we thought was different than it was. So it really helped us, and is helping us in redesign or in new launches of that line and everything too.
One other thing too, they may not be able to do marketing campaigns for you, but people like Jack Daniels, they invited us out to where they make the whiskey, and they gave us a tour and they let us film it and get great creative assets that we could use in our own marketing materials. And so it is collaborative for sure. And you work with the right licensor, they want to help you have the what you need to promote them. So that's always been something good too.
That's true. Yeah, we're going to visit Fender next week or the week after next, and so we'll get to tour their facility in Hollywood and go through and see how they make guitars. So that's going to be a blast, and it is something where you have to push on your side as the smaller brand because they're the big fish, and they're not going to be hand-holding you the whole time. So you do have to be visible in a very good way, not too annoying, but just annoying enough to have a relationship and get the resources that you need from them.
Yeah, no, such a great reminder to be proactive in any relationship. And I love the approach you guys take of just attaching on to something they're already doing anyways, right? They're running their operations regardless of whether you show up or not. So you might as well, be able to take part in that and get some really interesting creative, like you mentioned. Thank you so much, John and Michelle. This has been so informative. I'm sure for our listeners too, who maybe have never even considered licensing as a revenue stream in their business, I'm sure this opened a lot of eyes and doors to that. So if any of you got a new idea from today's conversation with John and Michelle, please please, send them a message, thank them for their time and sharing their insights, and go check out their amazing wedding bands. There's so many collections. There's a collection for everybody, really. So all of their links will be below in the show notes. But John and Michelle, is there any specific link that you would love people to send people to, or for them to connect with you guys personally?
Just go to manlybands.com and check us out. Yeah, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you in next week's episode.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.